Welcome to this 1-hour English lesson. Today, you're going to learn English with the news. We're going to read 2 different news articles together so you can learn a lot of advanced vocabulary, complex grammar, and correct pronunciation. Let's get started.
First, I'll read the headline. Biden makes history by joining striking auto workers on the picket line. These are the striking workers. So striking workers, those are workers who are on strike, to be on strike. To be on strike, this is when workers refuse to work, and this is because there's an argument with the employer, and it's about working conditions, pay levels, or job losses. So they refuse to work, and they do that officially by saying, we're going on strike. So they already went on strike, so now we can say they are on strike, to be on strike. So that's the striking auto workers, the workers who are refusing to work because of conditions. Now, the picket line. Notice for pronunciation, it's picket. Pick it, and then say it combined. Pick it, picket, picket, picket line. The picket line, that just represents the group of protesting workers. And how do they protest? Well, you can see it visibly. They'll have signs. They'll be shouting, "Don't work, pay us more money," or whatever the issue is. Support our cause. That's what they'll do. So they're protesting. And specific to workers who are striking, we refer to that as a picket line. And as you can see, this is President Joe Biden, and he is with the workers. So we can say he has joined the picket line. Now, don't worry about writing all these notes down because I summarize everything in a free lesson PDF. You can look in the description for the link to download that. Let's continue. President Joe Biden made history today when he visited a picket line. Now we know what this is, a picket line in Michigan, in a show of loyalty to auto workers who are striking for higher wages and cost of living increases. So now we know why the workers are on strike. They're on strike because they want higher wages. So wages is, of course, the money that they are paid. They want to be paid more money. They want higher wages, and they want cost of living increases. This is where your salary is increased by, let's say, 2% to compensate for the fact that every year food becomes more expensive, gas becomes more expensive, all of your daily costs become more expensive. So you're not actually making more money for this cost of living increase because all of your expenses are higher. So if you receive a specific percentage increase, 1%, 2%, 3%, it's so your salary remains the same given the cost of living increases. I wrote these notes for you. Now let's continue. Biden is looking to polish his pro-labor persona. First, let's take a look at polish. The verb to polish is when you take something, usually silver, and you rub it, and then it goes from dull to very shiny and sparkly. So dirty to clean. That's when you polish. So you can polish rings. In the past, people polished their silver and their dishes. Now we don't commonly use silverware or that style of dishes. So the expression is to polish one's image. So the same thing, you take your image of yourself and you make it seem better, you improve it, you make it more attractive, just like I can polish this ring and it will go from dull to very shiny and attractive. So you can do that with a person as well, and that's normally done with public figures, an actor, a company executive, or a politician. Of course, they need to polish their image, become more attractive. Now here, they didn't use the word image, they used the word persona. Persona, this is someone's image, but in a particular situation. For example, you might have a persona at work that's very different from your persona with your family. And that could be different from your persona with your friends. Maybe at work, you're very serious, but with your friends, you're very casual and you like telling a lot of jokes. But at work, you act very differently. So it's how you behave, how you act in specific situations. That's one's persona. And I'm sure you can imagine that politicians specifically have very specific ways they act in situations, and that would be their persona. So that's why they used polish his pro-labor persona. So this is his image of himself as someone who supports labor issues like the striking auto workers. Biden is looking to polish his pro-labor persona as he becomes the first sitting president to appear on a picket line. Okay, and this is why previously it said he made history. And he made history because he's the first sitting president to appear on a picket line. Now, what is a sitting president? Well, a sitting president is a president who is currently in power, because past presidents, they still maintain the title of president. We still call Donald Trump President Donald Trump, but he's not the current president. So to avoid confusion, he's the first sitting president. So the president that is currently acting as president. So that's the sitting president. And that's how he made history.
Are you enjoying this lesson? If you are, then I want to tell you about the Finally Fluent Academy. This is my premium training program where we study native English speakers from TV, the movies, YouTube, and the news so you can improve your listening skills of fast English, expand your vocabulary with natural expressions, and learn advanced grammar easily. Plus, you'll have me as your personal coach. You can look in the description for the link to learn more, or you can go to my website and click on Finally Fluent Academy. Now let's continue with our lesson.
The United Auto Workers strike against the big three auto companies. So the United Auto Workers, that would be the union that represents all of these workers. So it's their strike against the big three auto companies. So in North America, the big three auto companies are General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler maker Stellantis. So I guess the parent company of Chrysler is Stellantis. I've actually never heard of Stellantis before. Of course, I know Chrysler, but I did not know the name Stellantis. Has entered its 11th day. So they've been on strike for 11 days. Now, before we move on, I'll point out that here, the United Auto Workers strike, here, strike is a noun. So strike can be used as a noun, our strike, their strike, the strike, and it can be used as a verb. Now, let's go see how it can be used as a verb, because there are two common ways: to be on strike, which we talked about, and to go on strike, which I briefly mentioned. But here's an example. The workers have been on strike for 11 days. Now, this is in the present perfect because it started in the past and it continues until now. So the verb is be. Have been on strike, to be on strike. Now, we use to go on strike to talk about the transition from not on strike, so working for the company, to on strike, so not working any longer. So the workers went on strike 11 days ago. That's when the strike began. The workers went on strike because went is the past simple of the verb go. So two common ways, and remember, it can also be used as a noun. Let's continue. In traveling to Wayne County at the invitation of the UAW president, remember UAW, this is United Auto Workers, is the group of workers who are on strike. The UAW president, Shawn Fain, Biden is positioning himself squarely on the side of striking workers. So here, if Biden is positioning himself on the side of striking workers, it means that Biden is siding with the workers. He's taking their side. He's supporting them. Now, notice this. Positioning himself squarely on the side of striking workers. Squarely is an adverb, and it means directly and firmly. So he's positioning himself firmly on the side of striking workers. It just makes it sound stronger. That's why they used it. So here the expression is to position oneself on the side of and then another party. Here are two alternative ways you could say it. Biden is siding with. So the verb is side, to side with someone. Or Biden is supporting. Now you support someone. Biden is supporting the workers. Those are two alternatives you could use here. After the White House spent weeks quietly seeing whether it could play a more neutral role in mediating the dispute between labor and management. Okay, let's look at mediating. To mediate. The verb here is to mediate, and that's when you help solve a conflict, and you do that by communicating with the parties involved and help those parties reach a solution. Now, the person who does that is called a mediator. So a mediator, that's the noun form, and then to mediate, that's the verb form. So previously, the White House spent weeks quietly seeing whether it could play a more neutral role. So it sounds like the White House, which includes the president, Joe Biden, was going to take a more neutral role, but now Biden has not taken a neutral role because he has positioned himself squarely on the side of striking workers. So now Biden could not act as the mediator because he has taken a side, and a mediator would have to be neutral. Mediate the dispute, this is just another word for conflict, between labor and management. Let's continue. Biden's appearance also reflects the political reality of the moment. As he runs for a second term, so second term as president, he needs to win Rust Belt states like Michigan and can ill afford to alienate workers and their families by aligning himself with well-paid corporate executives. Okay, so he needs to win certain states like Michigan. To be honest, I'm not sure what a Rust Belt is. Obviously, it's describing the state in a specific way, but we can just ignore that. He needs to win states like Michigan and can ill afford to. This is another way of simply saying he can't afford to. He can't afford to. He can't afford to alienate workers. If you alienate someone, it means that you make them feel like they aren't part of you or you don't relate to them in any way. You make them feel very different. And obviously, if they feel that way, they're not going to vote for him as president. So he can't afford to alienate workers and their families. And how would he alienate these workers? Make them feel like they're different or make them feel like they're not understood. Well, he could alienate them if he aligned himself with well-paid corporate executives. Now, he would align himself with the executives if he sided with the executives, if he supported the executives. Who are the executives? Well, in this case, it's the auto workers. These are the workers that Biden wants to side with to support. And the executives are the CEOs and the executive members at these auto companies, GM, Ford, and Chrysler. So he doesn't want to align himself with the CEO of GM, Ford, and Chrysler. He wants to align himself with the workers and their families. He doesn't want to alienate these workers, to make the workers feel like, well, they don't belong with the president. The president doesn't understand their needs. I wrote those notes for you. Now let's continue. Biden's likely opponent in the 2024 general election seems to have made a similar calculation. So the calculation, we'll just think as a math calculation. But in this case, it's a political calculation. It's when you decide how you're going to behave, what you're going to do in order to maximize your potential of winning. And he calculated that he can get the most votes by siding with the workers and their families rather than with the corporate executives. So that's how he calculated that. So that's the calculation. Donald Trump is due to address UAW workers in Michigan on Wednesday. So Biden is supporting the workers on the picket line, and Biden's opponent in 2024 will likely be former President Donald Trump, and Donald Trump will also be supporting those workers. Well, at least he's due to address the workers. So at this point, he hasn't formally supported them, but he's going to address them, which means he's going to speak directly to them. And most likely, he will say something positive. But that hasn't happened yet. So that is just my speculation at this point. Presidents often like to preserve space for themselves in such standoffs. A standoff is when you have one group here, one group or even one person, and then one group or one person here, and they can't reach an agreement. So they're unable to come together. And that's why it's a standoff, because one is here, and they won't come together. So that's a standoff. Here's a more everyday example. My wife and I are at a standoff. Notice here the expression is to be at a standoff. My wife and I are at a standoff. I want to accept the promotion in Germany, but she wants to stay in France. So here's the man's position, and this is the woman's position, and they're not willing to compromise. They're not willing to change their position. So they're just staying in their positions. They're at a standoff. And you can describe this entire thing as the standoff. So this standoff here, presidents often like to preserve space for themselves in such standoffs so that both sides will consider them a fair broker. This is a very complicated way of simply saying presidents often like to remain neutral. To preserve space for themselves, it just means they don't generally take sides. They like to remain neutral so they can act more as a mediator. A mediator. Remember, we learned that before. A mediator. Someone who solves the conflict by bringing the parties together and by helping them communicate. So this is what presidents generally do, but that's not what President Joe Biden did. Biden also worried about intervening too directly in a strike whose economic cost has already exceeded $1.6 billion. So this strike has only been on for 11 days, I believe was in the article, 11 days. And the economic cost has already exceeded $1.6 billion. So obviously it's in the president's interest to resolve the conflict. And that's generally why they like to remain neutral. Now here, when you intervene in something, it means you involve yourself in something. So here the verb to intervene, again, to intentionally become involved. Intentionally means you say, I want to become involved. You decide to intentionally become involved in a difficult situation, and you do that because you want to improve it or prevent it from getting worse. Now, you can use this again in a more everyday context. For example, the kids have been fighting all day. We should probably intervene. So you could say this to your husband or wife. We should probably intervene. We should probably involve ourselves in this difficult situation so we can improve it or at least prevent it from getting worse. So you can intervene in specific conflicts. And remember, you intentionally do that. Biden also worried about intervening too directly in a strike. So here, notice this is the noun form. You know it's a noun because there's an article here. In a strike whose economic cost has already exceeded $1.6 billion. Now, obviously, this was in the past. He worried about it, but this didn't prevent him because he did intervene and he sided with the auto workers, and he did that because he didn't want to alienate them, and he calculated that he needs their vote and their family's vote as well to run in the next presidential election. So that's the end of our article. What I'll do now is I'll read the article from start to finish, and this time you can focus on my pronunciation. Biden makes history by joining striking auto workers on the picket line. President Joe Biden made history today when he visited a picket line in Michigan in a show of loyalty to auto workers who are striking for higher wages and cost of living increases. Biden is looking to polish his pro-labor persona as he becomes the first sitting president to appear on a picket line. The United Auto Workers strike against the big three auto companies, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler maker Stellantis, has entered its 11th day. In traveling to Wayne County, at the invitation of the UAW president, Shawn Fain, Biden is positioning himself squarely on the side of striking workers, after the White House spent weeks quietly seeing whether it could play a more neutral role in mediating the dispute between labor and management. Biden's appearance also reflects the political reality of the moment. As he runs for a second term, he needs to win Rust Belt states like Michigan and can ill afford to alienate workers and their families by aligning himself with well-paid corporate executives. Biden's likely opponent in the 2024 general election seems to have made a similar calculation. Donald Trump is due to address UAW workers in Michigan on Wednesday. Presidents often like to preserve space for themselves in such standoffs so that both sides will consider them a fair broker. Biden also worried about intervening too directly in a strike whose economic cost has already exceeded $1.6 billion.
Amazing job with that article. Now we're going to move on to the next article. Feel free to take a pause, get a cup of tea if you like, and let's continue on. Today, you're going to improve your fluency in English by reading and listening to English at the same time. We're going to read a news article together, and this is the best method that you can use to become fluent fast. Welcome back to JForrest English. I'm Jennifer. Now let's get started.
First, I'll read the headline. Trump blasts electric vehicles in Michigan a day after Biden's picket line visit. Here, blast is a verb, and you blast someone or something. In this case, he's blasting something, electric vehicles. And this is when you criticize, and you criticize severely. So a lot of criticism. Trump blasts electric vehicles in Michigan. He criticizes severely electric vehicles in Michigan. Now, The opposite of blast is commend. When you commend something, it means you praise it, you support it. So I hope you commend this video and you don't blast it. Of course, I don't want you to criticize this video. So you can put in the comments, I know we just started, but you can put in the comments, I commend this video. Hopefully you feel that way. But if you want to blast it, that is your right to do so. I just hope you don't, and I hope you commend this video. I commend this video. Put that in the comments. All right, so Trump blasts electric vehicles in Michigan. If you're not aware, in Michigan, they have a very large automobile industry. That's where most of the cars in North America are made. So that's why he blasts electric vehicles in Michigan. And this is a day after Biden's picket line visit. Of course, as I said, you can review this in my other lesson. Now, don't worry about taking these notes because I summarize everything in a free lesson PDF, so you can look for the link in the description. Let's continue. As his Republican rivals prepared to gather on stage in California for their second primary debate, Donald Trump was in Michigan. Okay, let's stop here and look at the verb gather on stage. When you gather, it means individual people come together. So it's another way of saying meet. We gathered to discuss the report. We met to discuss the report. Now, on stage is simply because this was during a debate and the candidates who are debating are on a stage, and then the audience is in the audience watching the candidates on stage. So the candidates gathered on stage and the audience watched that. Let's continue with the sentence. Donald Trump was in Michigan on Wednesday night working to win over blue-collar voters. So let's review that. Win over is a phrasal verb and you win someone over. When you win someone over, you get their support or you get their approval. So if you go to a job interview or you're trying to get a new client, you want to win that person over. You want to convince them to offer you the job or work for you. So you might say, I hope this proposal will win over the client, will get the client to support you, approve you, and then therefore hire you. Now in this case, Donald Trump is trying to win over blue-collar voters. Have you heard this adjective before? Blue collar. And then what's the opposite of blue collar? There's blue collar and there's white collar. It relates to the type of work that these people do. So blue collar workers, generally the work they do requires physical strength and physical skill, like an auto worker, a plumber, a carpenter, a builder. Those would be considered blue collar workers. A white collar worker, the work they do more requires their mental skill, not necessarily their physical strength. And so those are generally people who work in offices. So Donald Trump is trying to win over blue-collar voters by lambasting President Joe Biden. Lambasting. Now, first, I'll note that there are two alternative pronunciations, bast or based. Basting or basting. The one I use, basting, lambasting, is the more common, but you may also hear in American pronunciation basting, lambasting, lambasting, lambasting. I recommend lambasting because it is more common. Now, what does this mean by lambasting President Joe Biden? Again, it's another way of saying criticize. By criticizing, and remember, what else did we learn? By blasting President Joe Biden. So criticizing. Notice here it's an ing, and that's because we need to conjugate our verb. We have a preposition, so we need the ing. By criticizing, by blasting, I'll just add that so you remember the other word we learned, blasting. I will note though, blasting is a lot more common than lambasting. And also notice blast. So there's an L in blast, but here is not lamb blasting. No, it's lambasting. Basting. So remember, blast, but lambasting. Okay. By lambasting President Joe Biden and his push for electric cars. So his push for something. When you push for something, you demand that something repeatedly. So President Joe Biden and his push for electric cars. That could mean that he's demanding that us as the drivers drive electric cars over gas-powered cars. So he's pushing for electric cars to be widely used in public life. He's pushing for electric cars. So you can demand it, and you demand it repeatedly, or you simply try to make something happen. So if Joe Biden is pushing for electric cars, maybe he introduced a policy and he is trying to get everyone to support that policy as well. And the policy is that we're the general public, we're required to drive electric cars. As an example, the workers pushed for higher wages. So again, they could just repeatedly ask or demand higher wages. We want higher wages. We want higher wages. Or they really try to make that happen. So President Joe Biden and his push for electric cars in the midst of an auto workers strike. Now, in the midst of, that's if this is the start and the end of the auto workers strike, the midst of is in the middle or somewhere in progress of. So it's not at the beginning, it's not at the end, it's in the midst of. You could also say, during, simply. Push for electric cars. Oh, sorry. The in belongs to the expression. So it's in the midst of something. Now, all of that can be replaced with during. Push for electric cars during an auto worker strike. Or you could even say amid, which is slightly more formal than during. But as you can see, it's a lot shorter. It only takes 4 letters instead of 4 individual words to say the exact same thing. During an auto workers strike, amid an auto workers strike. Let's continue. The Republican front runner's trip. So the Republican front runner is Donald Trump. Now, his trip comes a day after Biden. And I'll point out that a front runner is the person who is currently leading something, usually in terms of a competition. So imagine a race where all these people are running and they're competing in this race. And then there's one person who's leading, one person who is faster. He is the front runner. But you can use this for any competition, not just in a race or athletic, because here we have a political competition. In a job interview, there could be 5 candidates. Of course, there's going to be 1, maybe even 2 front runners, 2 people or 1 person who is the strongest out of that group, who's more likely to get the job because they were able to successfully win over the interviewer. I wrote that definition, and here's an example sentence. We interviewed 5 applicants, and Tony is the front runner, so the one leading. His portfolio won us over, because you win someone over, and this is in the past simple. His portfolio won us over. The Republican frontrunner's trip, again, that's Donald Trump's trip, comes a day after Biden became the first sitting president in U.S. history to walk a picket line as he joined United Auto Workers in Detroit. Again, this is the topic of the other lesson I reviewed, so I'm not going to repeat that. The link is in the description. The union is pushing for, we see this again. And that's exactly the sentence I gave. The workers pushed for higher wages. And here it is. The union is pushing for higher wages. The only difference is I put mine in the past simple, and here we have it in the present continuous, because they're in progress now, is pushing for higher wages. So they're demanding it and they're taking action to accomplish this. Shorter work weeks and assurances from the country's top automakers that new electric vehicle jobs will be unionized. Okay, so they're pushing for more than one thing. They're pushing for three things. Let's talk about assurances. This is a noun, and an assurance, in this case plural, assurances. An assurance is basically a promise. It's a firm commitment. You may know the verb form, which is assure. I assure you that I'll drive you to the airport. So if I say this to you, you can feel relaxed because you know I'm going to take you to the airport because I assured you, which is saying I promised you. I gave you a firm commitment. I will do this. Now, this is the verb form, which, to be honest, is more commonly used. Now, if you use it as the noun form, assurance, you give someone your assurance. So that's why her matches she. She gave me, I'm the someone, and it's her assurance. The assurance, the commitment, the promise belongs to her. She gave me her assurance. Now, the word promise functions in exactly the same way. Here it's a verb and here it's a noun, and you can give someone your promise as well. So that's assurances from the country's top automakers that new electric vehicle jobs will be unionized. So I assure you the new electric vehicle jobs will be unionized. That's what they want to hear. The dueling appearances. Dueling. Let's talk about this. Here, dueling is an adjective and it describes the appearances. Now, the word duel is a competition or a fight, and it's usually between two people. But in this case, it's an adjective describing appearances. An appearance is when you appear in public. So we have Donald Trump appearance, his appearance, and then we have Joe Biden's appearance. So when they both appear in public. Now, those appearances, they're in competition with each other. They're fighting each other. So the dueling appearances preview what will likely be a chief dynamic of the 2024 general election. So by describing this as a preview, it's saying that this is what we can expect in the 2024 election. Just like a movie trailer is a preview of the movie. It tells you what you can expect in the movie. So they're saying that these two appearances, Joe Biden in Michigan, Donald Trump in Michigan, this is what we can expect in the 2024 general election, which increasingly looks like a rematch between Trump and Biden. It's a rematch, which means they're matching again. They're competing again because they already competed against each other in the past. So it's a rematch. I wrote that definition. Now let's continue. Michigan is expected to again be a critical battleground state as both candidates try to paint themselves as champions of the working class. Now, generally, the working class, that includes both blue collar and white collar workers. In this case, the focus is more on blue collar workers because in Michigan, the main industry is the automotive industry, and people work mainly with their hands and their physical strength. So more so blue collar workers. A battleground state, well, it's in Michigan that they're going to battle. Of course, metaphorically in the sense of they're going to compete against each other politically. They're going to debate. They're going to appear in that state. They're going to try to win over voters in Michigan. It's a battleground state. Now, if they try to paint themselves as, it's simply saying to describe themselves as or to appear as. So Donald Trump wants to paint himself as a champion of the working class. So he's working for them. He's there to support them and their needs. But Joe Biden also wants to be known as, to describe himself as a champion of the working class. So they're trying to paint themselves as, describe themselves, appear as. Let's continue. Trump's decision to skip another debate. When you skip something like a meeting, a class, a party, an event, it means you don't do it. You don't do it. So he didn't go to the debate. If you skip class, it means you didn't go to class, even though you had an obligation to do it. So if you say, oh, I skipped the meeting at work today, it means you were invited to the meeting. It was expected that you would attend the meeting, but you didn't attend the meeting. So I skipped the 9 o'clock meeting today because I was very busy with other tasks. So I wrote that definition for skip, and here's an example. I skipped the 9 a.m. meeting today because I was busy trying to win over the client. So your boss won't be mad at you for skipping the meeting because you had a very good reason. So Trump's decision to skip another debate comes as he maintains a commanding lead. This is a way of saying a big lead, a commanding lead in the GOP primary. Because remember, Trump is the front runner. Even as he faces 4 separate criminal indictments, and as his campaign works to pivot to the general election months before primary voting begins next year. Let's talk about pivot to. So pivot is a verb. So if I'm right here and I pivot, I turn or move in a different direction. That's physically what you do with your body for the verb pivot. So if you pivot your foot, you move your foot in a different direction. But we use this also to say that right now I'm working on this task and I'm going to pivot to this task. So it's you move in another direction, but in this case, it's your attention. It's what you're working on. So before he was involved in these criminal indictments that had all of his attention and focus. And now he's going to pivot. He's going to turn his attention to the general election. So he's going to shift his focus, turn his attention to, shift his focus. That's another useful expression. It means the same thing. I'll write that for you. To shift his focus to the general election. So you can use any one of these. Drake Enterprises makes automotive and heavy-duty truck components, including gear shift levers for semi-trucks, said its president Nathan Stempel, who noted a shift to electric cars would cripple him. Okay, I'm not too sure how this relates to what we were just talking about, but I think it's because of this part. He noted a shift to electric cars. So in this case, actually, a shift would mean the same as a pivot, because right now, the general public, we drive gas-powered cars. And if we shift to electric cars, we're going to pivot to electric cars. We're now going to drive electric cars. So you change from one to the other. So that's shift to. You could also say pivot to electric cars. Now, it would cripple him. It would cripple him. This is another way of saying it would destroy him. It would destroy. For example, COVID crippled many businesses. COVID destroyed many businesses. So this is a very useful alternative in your vocabulary. While Trump aides had said his audience would include several hundred current and former UAW members. This was the union, the auto workers union, and then this Drake Enterprises would be probably part of the union. That's why they're talking about him. And remember, both Trump and Biden want to win over these workers. So they want these workers' support. Now here, Trump aides. Aides is another word of assistance, and it's specifically used in politics, a political aide. They just use the word political aide instead of assistant, whereas assistant is most commonly used in offices, assistant. So while Trump aides, had said his audience would include several hundred current and former UAW members, as well as members of plumbers and pipe fitters unions. These are, again, both examples of blue-collar workers. The crowd also included many non-union workers who support the former president. The former president, of course, being Donald Trump, because he's not the current president, he's a past president, so the former president. I wrote that information for you. Now let's continue. Some said they had been invited by people who did business with Drake. Remember, Drake was the enterprise here who said they would be crippled if there was a shift to electric cars. And remember, Donald Trump is there to blast electric cars. So by blasting electric cars, by criticizing electric cars, Donald Trump is trying to win them over. I wrote this example for you. Donald Trump is trying to win these blue-collar workers over by blasting electric cars. I'll read this again. Some said they had been invited by people who did business with Drake. Others said they had simply arrived at the factory Wednesday afternoon and been allowed to attend. And that's the end of the article. So what I'll do now is I'll go to the beginning and I'll read the article from start to finish. And this time you can focus on my pronunciation. Let's do that now. Trump blasts electric vehicles in Michigan a day after Biden's picket line visit. As his Republican rivals prepared to gather on stage in California for their second primary debate, Donald Trump was in Michigan on Wednesday night working to win over blue-collar voters by lambasting President Joe Biden and his push for electric cars in the midst of an auto workers' strike. The Republican frontrunner's trip comes a day after Biden became the first sitting president in U.S. history to walk a picket line as he joined United Auto Workers in Detroit. The union is pushing for higher wages, shorter work weeks, and assurances from the company's top automakers that new electric vehicle jobs will be unionized. The dueling appearances preview what will likely be a chief dynamic of the 2024 general election, which increasingly looks like a rematch between Trump and Biden. Michigan is expected to again be a critical battleground state as both candidates try to paint themselves as champions of the working class. Trump's decision to skip another debate comes as he maintains a commanding lead in the GOP primary, even as he faces 4 separate criminal indictments, and as his campaign works to pivot to the general election months before primary voting begins next year. Drake Enterprises makes automotive and heavy-duty truck components, including gear-shift levers for semi-trucks, said its president, Nathan Stempel, who noted a shift to electric cars would cripple him. While Trump aides had said his audience would include several hundred current and former UAW members, as well as members of plumbers and pipe fitters unions, the crowd also included many non-union workers who support the former president. Some said they had been invited by people who did business with Drake. Others said they had simply arrived at the factory Wednesday afternoon and been allowed to attend.
Did you enjoy this lesson? Do you want me to make more lessons just like this? If so, put yes, yes, yes in the comments below. Put yes, 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 and I know you want more lessons. And you can get this free speaking guide where I share 6 tips on how to speak English fluently and confidently. You can click here to download it or look for the link in the description. And I recommend you watch this lesson right now. I know you'll love it.